Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Tahmid Al Hussaini from Dhaka, Bangladesh. I would first of all like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this very interesting session. So with me, I have Dr. Anil Sharma to assist me. First, I would like to introduce the SOAP lecture speaker of this session. Professor Gali Madhavi Lada is a professor at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. She obtained her PhD degree from Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. Prior to the joining at the Indian Institute of Science in 2003, she was an assistant professor at the IIT Guwahati for 1 year. Her areas of specializations include geocell reinforcement, soil geosynthetic interactions, image-based characterizations, seismic response of reinforced soil structures, and rock engineering. She has so far supervised 15 PhD students. She has published more than 150 technical papers in international and national journals and conferences. Professor Madhavi Lada is the primary geotechnical consultant for the world's highest railway bridge being constructed in Jammu, India. She received the Teacher Extraordinary Award from the Builders Association of India and several national and international Best Paper awards. She is a member of the ISSM GE technical committees on soil structure interaction and retaining walls, geomechanics from micro to micro, and IGS technical committee on soil reinforcement. She is currently the editor-in-chief of Indian Geotechnical Journal published by Springer and an associate editor of Geotextiles and Geomembranes published by Elsevier. With this brief introduction, I would like to invite Professor Gali Madhavi Lada to deliver her SOAP lecture.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very glad to be a part of this important conference. And my lecture topic is geosynthetics in retaining wall subjected to seismic shaking. I've been working in this area for the past 18 years since I joined the Indian Institute of Science. And it's my pleasure to take you through the journey of shaking table studies at IISc. This is the outline of my presentation. I will give you a brief introduction on shaking table studies, 1G physical modeling and geotechnical engineering, particularly in the context of retaining walls. And then some concepts of 1G modeling and shaking table, and in particular shaking table studies we are carrying out at Indian Institute of Science, and some important design considerations and credits. We all know why we build retaining walls. Anytime if we want to do a cutting and filling of an existing ground to either expand the freeway or to construct a new freeway or any load-bearing kind of a structure with a certain height, this will oppose the laws of gravity, because the height at which you are building this wall will be subjected to the gravitational forces of the mass which is being retained. So if the angle of repose at which soil is thought to be safe at that particular angle, if this is exceeded by the slope or the steepness of the retaining wall, usually we have failures. And even under static conditions, you have always a danger of failure in retaining wall, because you are always trying to retain a particular amount of soil which is under stress, and the stresses can be only increased due to external factors like surcharge pressures, live loads, and any other unknown factors. But particularly under seismic conditions, the danger of failure becomes even worse because we are imposing certain amount of horizontal shaking at the base, because of which the wall will try to slide or collapse. Now coming to the static forces acting on a retaining wall, I am showing you a very, very simple example of a retaining wall where you have different kinds of forces acting. One of the major forces which act in a retaining wall is soil pressure. The soil which is being retained by the wall, it actually tries to push the facing of the wall. Because of that, you have lateral earth pressure acting. And typically, as per Rankine's theory, we assume the distribution of this pressure to be triangular. And if you want to find out the resultant force acting on the wall due to the soil pressure, we take the area of this triangle, half of base into height, and it acts at a height of h/3 from the base. And if you have some surcharge acting on the retaining wall, then the resultant will be a rectangular distribution with a magnitude equal to coefficient of earth pressure into the amount of surcharge, uniform surcharge pressure. And this is equal at all elevations, and the area of this rectangle gives you the resultant thrust due to the surcharge pressure. And if you have some live loads acting on the retaining wall, then you need to assume the Boussinesq, the R. Westergaard's stress distribution theories are there. We derive the earth pressure distributions below the live loads, and we compute the resultant thrust due to these live loads. And then you calculate the total pressure as a combination of these, all these pressures. Now, when we have the seismic forces, what extra force comes onto the retaining wall is the horizontal and vertical forces due to earthquake. Usually in a pseudostatic analysis, we take the horizontal pressure as kh into W, where kh is the horizontal seismic coefficient, W is the weight of the soil wedge, which is actually it's a failure wedge, active wedge, which we call. So, and the vertical force will be kV into W. kV is the coefficient of vertical acceleration. Now, what happens when you have a reinforced retaining wall? Particularly, why I am telling you this is, we are talking about reinforced retaining walls. If you do not have reinforcement, in most of the cases, these horizontal pressures, which are actually pushing the retaining wall forward, one due to soil pressure, one due to live load, another one due to the surcharge pressure, and on top you have this seismic force which is pushing the wall. And you should find a mechanism by which you need to hold this wall back. And this is possible due to, if you can actually include some tensile elements into the retaining wall in the form of reinforcement. And if you have layers of reinforcement embedded into the backfill, you can actually compute the total tensile force, which will be actually trying to push the retaining wall back into its original position. So this is where the reinforcement comes into picture for the seismic stability of a retaining wall. Now, how does an earthquake force act? Earthquake forces it's actually an inertial force. Since the structure, any structure is usually under stable equilibrium, and then you have this earthquake force coming and shaking it at the ground level. And the structure will have its own rigidity or inertia to oppose this movement. And because of this, the components of the structure are subjected to different levels of displacement. This is what we call inertial force effect. Now, to encounter or sustain this inertial force due to earthquake, the structure has to be as flexible as possible. If the structure is extremely rigid, then it will undergo enormous amounts of displacements, whereas if it is a flexible structure, the displacements will be limited, and the structure will have the flexibility to sustain the deformations. Now, this is a picture of a conventional type gravity retaining wall in Japan, which was damaged severely in 2007 because of an earthquake. Because conventional gravity retaining walls are extremely rigid structures, they will not be able to displace under the influence of earthquakes. They oppose the deformations. That is why they undergo brittle kind of failure. In this plot, I am trying to pictorially show you how a brittle failure and a ductile failure happens in an earthquake scenario. If a retaining wall is a very rigid structure, then it will collapse in a brittle way without much deformations. Whereas if you have a retaining wall which is flexible, the wall will undergo deformations, but since the wall is ductile, it will stay back in its original position. It will not undergo a collapse. So ductility is the key property for earthquake survival, and most of the reinforced retaining wall structures are extremely ductile compared to our conventional gravity type retaining walls. If you take a GRS wall is a short form for the geosynthetic reinforced soil wall. GRS wall reacts to earthquake in a very flexible manner. This is analogous to kind of ship floating on a wave. In a ocean or sea, if the wave is passing and there is the ship is passing and there is a huge wave, then we can think of this boat actually moving on the wave, and it moves along the wave. And when the wave recedes, it comes back to its equilibrium position. Similar thing happens in the geosynthetic reinforced soil wall. When there is an earthquake passing through the GRS wall, it actually flexes, undergoes deformations, but the deformations will be contained within the structure because it is extremely flexible structure. And once the earthquake passes, it will come back to its original position. So geosynthetic reinforced soil walls have main advantages of improved seismic performance and ease of construction, and also a lot of savings in cost because we are using polymers instead of cement and concrete. So many recent earthquakes show that geosynthetic reinforced soil walls have performed extremely well under seismic conditions. One such example is in the Kobe earthquake of 1995. There is a geogrid reinforced retaining wall which is shown in this picture, which is built for 300 meters long using geogrids, and you can see panel facing at the front. So in 1995, there is a devastating earthquake which hit this area, and you can see that all the surrounding buildings are collapsed, but the retaining wall, which is made with the geogrids, is completely safe. It has undergone very less damage during this earthquake. This witnesses the seismic performance of reinforced soil structures. And among the studies on seismic response of geosynthetic reinforced soil walls, you can have reduced scale model studies, including centrifuge and shaking table studies, field studies, and numerical studies. In this lecture, I will be concentrating only on the reduced scale model studies, that too on shaking table, which is available in our lab. So in a centrifuge, generally you have this NG conditions, because of which you can simulate the field stress conditions exactly in a laboratory model, because you have this acceleration at which the model will be rotating, which will create the centrifugal forces, because of which the stress conditions within the model will be increased several times to be equal to the stress conditions in a prototype. But in a shaking table model, you have 1G conditions. That is, you are conducting experiments in one gravity condition. So the stresses in the model will not be equal to the stresses in the prototype. To get the stresses in the prototype, you need to use some scaling laws so that you can actually extrapolate the results from the shaking table studies to field conditions. Centrifugal studies are very good because they're NG model test, but they also have some serious limitations, like the acceleration field may not be uniform within the model, and also there could be grain size effects which are affecting the performance. And also shaking table studies, as I already told, they are 1G model tests, but definitely there are more number of shaking table studies reported in the literature than the centrifuge test, because of the simple fact that you can create bigger models in shaking table compared to centrifuge. And also creation of model and managing the instrumentation of the models is much easier in a shaking table. All said and done, centrifuge modeling has its own advantage because you don't have to use any scaling factors like in shaking table studies. And the concept of physical modeling, explained by Zimi in 1995, we call exactly similar model is created in the lab when three conditions are satisfied. One is you have geometric similarity, which means the linear dimensions are equally scaled. Kinematic similarity, in which the motions are exactly similar. Dynamic similarity, that means homologous parts of the systems, both in model and prototype, are they experience homologous net forces, which is possible if you have kinematic similarity and the equal similar mass distributions. So if you have this shaking table model studies, how do you create scaling laws so that the results from the shaking table model studies can be extrapolated to understand the performance of actual prototype structures in the field? There is this scaling factor. A length scaling factor can be defined as length of a linear dimension scaling factor, which is length of the model by length of the prototype. It's a very simple scaling, geometric scaling. See, if you want to create a similar scaling factor for force, then you go with the dimensional parameters, like force is gamma into V. So the force parameter would be gamma V of model by gamma P, that is prototype gamma into V of prototype. But here gamma should be same for model and prototype. That is one condition. So technically your V has dimensions of volume. V is volume. So volume has dimensions of a linear dimension cube. So the scaling factor should be multiplied 3 times on its own. So to get the force scaling factor. So this is how you create the scaling laws from the basic laws of physics and motion. And there is also a scaling law proposed by Rocha for stress-strain response of model and prototype. So Rocha has created 2 scaling factors, alpha for stress scaling and beta for strain scaling. If you have a stress-strain response under cyclic load for model and prototype, and the stress in the model and strain in the model are related by the parameter alpha, and stress in the model and stress in the prototype are related by alpha, and strain in the model and strain in the prototype are related by beta. But this has not become very famous because most of the times this is not such a straightforward linear difference in the scaling of stress and strain in model and prototype. So the other theory is proposed by Scott. This is a very, very interesting theory based on critical state of soils. A critical state or steady state of a soil is the state in which the soil will be undergoing deformation at constant effective stress, constant volume, and constant shear stress. So if you have such a critical state or steady state, and if you have a void ratio in the model and prototype managed in such a way that they are at equal difference between the steady state and the current state, then they both will have same stress strain response. This is a very interesting theory. If you can see this in the plot, you have this steady state, which is E log P prime, what we are plotting on, for the steady state line. And then the model and prototype are, the response is plotted exactly in parallel to the steady state line. And the difference between the void ratio of model and the steady state line and model and the prototype, a prototype and the steady state line is exactly same. So in such case, you will have the stress strain response of model same as the stress strain response of the prototype, which was proved by many other researchers in later days. So the most simplified scaling laws were proposed by EI in 1989. So these are based on the hysteresis response of model and prototype, and also based on the basic physics and motion, laws of motion. So here, these are the final scaling factors proposed by EI, where density, displacement, mass, force, strain, and all other parameters, including acceleration, frequency, damping, everything in the prototype is extrapolated from the model using a scaling factor. Lambda is the linear scaling between model and prototype. So if you want to, when we are talking about reinforced retaining walls, it's also important to scale the stiffness of the reinforcement. it's not as straightforward as other parameters, because the reinforcement stiffness is governed by the strain at which we are calculating the stiffness, not by the ultimate tensile strength of the reinforcement, because the stresses within the reinforced retaining walls will be very, very less compared to the ultimate shear strength, shear stress to which the reinforced band can be subjected to. So we need to be very careful with the strain levels at which we are operating. So the modal scale stiffness can be obtained from the stiffness of the prototype divided by lambda square. Lambda is the linear scaling. So this is proposed by LMM and Bathurst in 2004. And one more important thing we need to consider while we are doing physical modeling using shaking table is creating a laminar container. Usually, if you carry out your model test in a rigid container, you have inherent problems, like there could be reflection of waves from at the boundaries, and there are side frictions which will come into your measurements of stresses and forces, displacements. And there is also resistance to the deformation of the soil. The soil will not be moving in its natural state inside a rigid container. To avoid these limitations, researchers have created laminar containers. These laminar containers are the containers in which the soil is free to move on its own accord, and the side walls will not create any friction to the movement of the soil. I will not say zero friction, but definitely it is much, much minimized compared to rigid containers. And there are also minimized boundary effects. And another important thing is, how do you select the ground motion in a shaking table study? People use sinusoidal motion, stepped wave, and different kinds of waves. And they also use the actual ground motion, which is captured from different earthquakes across the world. You can use any of these ground motions. And most popular form of ground motion is a sine sweep. In sine sweep, you subject the reinforced or any soil structure on the shaking table to a ground motion in which the frequency is continuously increasing. Initially, it starts with a very low value, low frequency, you can see in the picture, and it keeps on increasing until it reaches a very high frequency. In this way, you can also find out the fundamental frequency of the structure to which you are conducting the modal test. So this is the introduction. From here, I take it on to describing the ongoing research at IASC in this area. So we have carried out in our lab shaking table studies on different types of retaining walls, including wrap-faced, rigid-faced, modular block, geocell walls, and geosynthetic reinforced soil walls. I will just show you, for the completeness, I will just show you what are these different types of retaining walls. A wrap-faced retaining wall is a wall in which you do not need any additional facing. The reinforcement, either it is geotextile or a geonet or a geogrid, is wrapped around each lift of this retaining wall, so that it creates one complete layer of a retaining wall. You don't need additional facing. This acts like facing plus reinforcement. And a full height panel reinforced retaining wall is in which you have these concrete panels as facing. These are for the full height. Tatsuoka Tauhata from Japan have done extensive work on these types of retaining walls. And you have reinforcement inside, either grid or textile. So this is a full height panel reinforced wall. And modular block wall it consists of reinforcement inside and modular blocks which fit into each other because of their geometry. They fit into each other. They don't need any additional fixtures like in other segmental panel walls. Here you have each one sitting on its the next subsequent layer, and final wall is created with the facing and reinforcement like this. And a geocell retaining wall is made up of geocell facing, where you have layers of geocell spread and filled with soil, and then retained backfill. And the facing has this stack of geocells, creating the entire facing for the wall. And it also has an advantage of you can grow a lot of vegetation on these pockets of geocells, so that you can cover this entire area and also provide additional reinforcement through the roots of these vegetation. Coming to our shaking table, it's a 1 meter by 1 meter shaking table, which can hold a load of 1 ton and frequency range 0.05 hertz to 50 hertz. And you can test up to 2G accelerations, and amplitude is plus or minus 200 millimeters. So we also have this laminar box design for this shaking table, which has these rectangular stacks of aluminum, hollow aluminum panels, which are very, very low weight panels. And they have in between each of these stacked panels, you have these roller bearings on which these panels can freely move, and you have a frame outside which contains this entire thing and which is fixed to the base of the shaking table top. And then since you have these roller bearings which you are seeing in this picture, the motion of these panels with respect to each other is very, very smooth. And you have the soil inside the retaining wall, inside this laminar box, moving in a free manner compared to rigid retaining wall. It is a one-dimensional shaking table, or 1 degree of freedom, so it can only move in the horizontal direction. There are some instrumentation which we are using, like accelerometers, pressure sensors, and strain gauges. These are all very common type, but the very interesting type of instrumentation we are using are ultrasonic displacement sensors. These do not touch the model, but they are at a distance from the model. They send ultrasonic sound pulses, and the sound pulses touch the moving object and comes back in a reflection. And based on the arrival time, you can find out the distance between the sensor and the moving object. So in a way, in a millisecond, you can take about 100 measurements of the deformations of the wall, which is very important in dynamic testing and shaking table studies. This is a schematic diagram of the wrap-faced model wall we have created. You have like these stacks, like I already explained to you, and you have pressure sensors which are measuring the pressure inside the wall, and accelerometers A1, A2, A3, where you measure the amplification of acceleration at different levels, ultrasonic displacement sensors placed away from the facing. And the procedure is very simple. The construction, I'm just showing you some pictures, like you just, geotextile is used for reinforcement, so woven geotextile. You keep one layer of this geotextile, and on top you fill the sand up to the height to which you are trying to fill one lift, and embed your pressure sensors. What you are seeing here is pressure sensor at the required elevation, and accelerometer. This is also embedded inside the soil. And then you finish the one layer of, you wrap it around carefully. The textile is wrapped around the soil to a certain length. And sand pluviation technique is used to fill the soil so that you get the uniform relative density within the model. And this is a finished wrap-faced model. The yellow ones, what you are seeing here, are the ultrasonic displacement sensor. And some results, I'm not going into the details. You can see the effect of relative density. As you are increasing the relative density from 37% to 87%, the horizontal displacement of the wall is coming down from 50 millimeters to almost like 5-6 millimeters. This test is carried out at a very high earthquake scenario, I mean, where your frequency is 3 hertz and acceleration is 0.2 g. And to simplify the presentation of amplifications, acceleration amplifications, we have used RMS amplification factor. This is root mean square acceleration, a very simple parameter. You have these so many number of cycles in which you are computing the acceleration, measuring the acceleration, and you have positive and negative accelerations. To average out the acceleration for the overall test at any elevation, what you do is take the square of the acceleration and integrate it for the entire 0 to PD, the duration. So you get the square acceleration, and then mean of it, that is dividing by the total duration, gives you the mean, and then taking a root, because you squared it, you take a root, so that you have an absolute value of average acceleration which represents the average acceleration to which the model is subjected to. Now, this is the picture which shows you the effect of surcharge pressure both on displacements and acceleration amplifications. Acceleration amplifications varied from about 1.75 to between 1.5, and displacements with the increase in surcharge from 0.5 to 1.5, you have decreased displacements. As you increase the surcharge, your stiffness on the top, you are actually putting a rigid boundary on the top, and you are also increasing the vertical force. So the horizontal displacements are reducing. And also with a number of reinforcing layers, you have like 3, 4, 6 number of layers. You can see that the deformations are changing from 90 mm to almost like less than 10 millimeters. So the effect of reinforcement is very clearly seen in this picture. And usually when we are designing a reinforced retaining wall, the general guideline is the reinforcement length should be 0.6 times the height so that you avoid pull-out failure. But under seismic conditions, the 0.6 parameter will not work. This is what's shown in this plot. When your reinforcement length is 0.5 times h or 0.7 times h and 1 h, you can see the difference in the displacements and the earth pressures inside the wall. If you have, even when at 0.7 times h, your deformations are as high as 85 millimeters in the model. When you use length equal to the height of the retaining wall, you are reducing the deformations to much lesser value. So the static and dynamic design of retaining walls can be completely different in terms of reinforcement. And then this picture shows you the effect of frequency with different frequency values, how the accelerations and displacements are varying. The other set of model tests are on rigid faced walls. Here, instead of wrap, we have a rigid wall. I will show you a photograph which makes it more clear. You have stacks of steel panels which are rectangular and hollow, and these are actually stacked inside guide rods. These are steel guide rods in which these are actually pushed into, so that you create a full height rigid wall, which is extremely rigid and not flexible at all. So inside you create the retaining wall. You can either have reinforcement or you need not have reinforcement. The comparison between unreinforced retaining wall and reinforced retaining wall with the variation in the relative density of the backfill soil is shown here at an acceleration of 0.1 g and 1 hertz. So very moderate earthquake we can call. So you can see that the unreinforced retaining walls, when you are 37% relative density, the deformations are very less, 2 to 3 mm. Even though the wall is unreinforced, since it's a rigid faced wall, your deformations are not as much as the wrap faced walls. But when you have this reinforcement, your horizontal displacements are much less. They are less than 1 mm. They are almost nil when you have a rigid faced retaining wall. This is an excellent method of constructing a reinforced wall. Most of the Japanese retaining walls are rigid faced full height retaining walls with geocrit reinforcement inside. And this is another picture showing the accelerations, how they are varying in a rigid faced wall. And comparing the displacements of different types of walls, wrap faced, rigid faced, and rigid reinforced. Rigid faced reinforced retaining walls are much better in their seismic performance because the displacements are much low, almost insignificant. And this is the effect of shaking frequency again. And reinforcement type also, we have used different types of reinforcement. Since this is a reduced scale model, the reinforcement stiffness also has to be reduced. So PX is a biaxial grid, UA is an uniaxial grid, a geonet and a weak geotextile. All these different types of materials are used and their performance is shown here. So unreinforced soil retaining wall has the maximum deformations, whereas all reinforced retaining walls showed excellent performance in terms of reduced deformations. And segmental retaining walls, we have actually casted these modular blocks in our lab with reinforcement. You can see that there is a lip here. So which allows for easy fitting of successive blocks of modular concrete blocks, one onto the other, so that you create a facing for it. You can read about the details of this in our papers if you want more details how to create these modular blocks and retaining wall. GeoGrid is used as reinforcement, and this is a finished retaining wall. And interesting results are obtained because here we are testing modular block and then comparing it with unreinforced and also rigid faced walls. Here we are comparing 2-layer and 3-layer modular facing walls. With the 3-layer modular facing walls with 47% relative density, that is very less relative density, you can actually bring down the deformations from 15 mm to almost like 2 to 3 mm, which is excellent. And
Professor Lata,
yes.
sorry to interrupt you. Can you please finish by 5 minutes?
Yes,
Is it possible?
sure,
Okay,
sure,
thank you.
definitely.
Thank you.
So the next set of tests are on geocell retaining walls. These are, I already explained, you have these geocell layers used as facing and filled with soil. The advantage of geocell reinforcement is that it is not only providing additional benefits through friction interlocking, but also provides all-round confinement, membrane effect, and also the anchorage effect because of its geometry. So the soil within the geocell is always in a state of all-round confinement, so that the entire facing of the retaining wall is in a state of like stress all the time, which is good all-round confinement, which opposes the any lateral forces acting on the facing. So these are models of retaining walls created using GeoNet. It's a very weak material. You can pull it apart using your hand. These retaining walls are constructed with very weak reinforcement so that you can actually reduce, you can use the scaling for reinforcement stiffness. So some typical results, one interesting result is when you have rigid facing, the retaining wall movement is almost like you have displacement continuously increasing with wall height, whereas when you use geocell facing, the reinforcement allows for the adjustment of displacement at every elevation so that the final displacement at any level is much, much less compared to a rigid faced wall. Also, it has an enhanced base width and it also has a set off when you are constructing it, which gives you additional geometric advantage of the retaining wall, which provides resistance against sliding and overturning in retaining walls. We've also created geocells using PVC, which is a very, very weak material. The normal PVC material, which we use as overhead projector slides, used photolamination technique to make these geocells. You can see comparison of performance of PVC and high density polyethylene geocells. So now how do you extrapolate these results to field retaining walls? I'm just showing you a guideline table where if your model has a scaling factor of like lambda L, say for example, your model dimension is 1, the dimension of the prototype is 10. So that is the linear scale. And the unit weight will be same in both model and prototype. And frequency of the model is whatever you need to use the scaling factor proposed by EI. The frequency of the model FM, so the prototype will have 0.17 FM as per this equation computed. Similarly, stress will be same in both models. Stress is like sigma m here. You have the model factor as lambda L. So this is 10 times sigma m. That is exactly stress is like stress in the prototype will be the scaling factor into the stress in the model. And the duration is 5.62 times the duration of the model. Displacement is 10 times the displacement in the model, and stiffness is 100 times the stiffness of the model. So these are the parameters calculated as per EI scaling factors, and similar, these factors are used to give guidelines and recommendations on where these parameters can be used and what would be the displacements, frequency, duration in the prototype retaining walls compared to the model ones. As a closing statement, I would like to say that shaking table tests provide important insights into the seismic response of reinforced retaining walls. They are not foolproof. You need to be extremely careful with your scaling, quality control, materials what we are using, their properties and everything. When you do a perfect test, then these results provide important clues for understanding the pressure distribution deformation. But at the same time, disclaimer you need to add that you cannot directly extrapolate the results of shaking table tests to the seismic response of actual structures in the field. You have to be very careful when we are using these results. All credits go to my students. My first PhD student, Murali Krishna, who is a professor at IIT Tirupati now, and Santana Kumar, my MTech student, and Manju, another PhD student of mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Lata, for a very interesting talk. Actually, we heard a lot about the different types of retaining walls, very practical problem. And yes, before going further, my comments, I would open the floor for questions from the audience. And I would request Dr. Anil to, if you can help me with the questions.
Sure. Sure. So from the audience, if there are any specific questions, now it is open for discussion.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, yeah.
Ma'am, have you modeled anything with this using contact element or contact interfaces between the geogrids and soil? So is there any modeling being done with this?
Yes, we did model these wrap-faced and rigid-faced retaining walls, what I have shown in the shaking table. So there is this, we have used the FLAC to model the retaining walls, used interface elements. That paper is available. I think it was published in ASE.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, I think there are no more questions. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your nice lecture. And it will be definitely useful for many of the researchers. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So can I add a few points?
Yeah, please, sir, please.
Professor Lata, it's a lot of work, I understand, but I would like to know a little bit more about if you have done any economical analysis. You have the different types of walls. So, what is your suggestion, under what conditions which wall would be preferred? If you could throw some light on this.
Yes, I mean, we have not particularly carried out any economic analysis of these walls, but definitely with the laboratory models what we have created, I can say that the planar reinforced retaining walls are the cheapest compared to your rigid faced walls. Any wrap faced walls are very cheap, but their deformations are not in the tolerable levels in most of the conditions. So use only for temporary structures. You can't use it for permanent structures. So the ones which we can use for permanent structures are geogrid walls, generally full height walls, are geocell walls, are modular block walls. So comparatively, rigid block, the full height walls are very expensive because you use concrete facing, and also the connectors and the reinforcement also is heavy in those walls. But they are very good in terms of their performance. But geocell walls are comparatively expensive compared to the regular walls, but they are much cheaper compared to the full height walls, and they give same additional benefits like rigid faced walls. But their height is limited. You can't construct them for like more than 10 meters. That's the limitation.
Thanks for this elaboration. There's another point. Because on your test, you had this rigid bottom below your retaining wall. What if we want to see what is the situation if we have some soft soil below your retaining wall? Have you done any kind of study?
No. Actually, because the shaking table has the top. So we are constructing the structure on top of the shaking table. It's a kind of a table. So there is no way that we can have a soft bottom, because it has to transfer that movement from the actuator to the structure. So that is the only way. You cannot actually have a softer. I understand your question. In the real field, you will not have any of these rigid boundary coming in the way of your wave which is transmitted from the source to the structure. But in here, definitely we have the limitation, because you are trying to create this horizontal motion at the base. So the base is rigid always in a shaking table test.
Yeah, but have you done any numerical study? Numerical study is possible with.
Yes, we can, but we have not done. Yeah, honestly, we have not done any such study.
Okay, well, Professor Lata, I'm not sure if there is any more questions. If not, yes, I would like to give, I would request everybody to give you a big hand. I don't know how to give it here on the virtual platform, but it was very nice to meet you and hear from you. And actually we will now, okay, so
Thank you, ma'am.
we